Her tentacles swaying seductively in the breeze, the Venus kid trap was again poised and ready. Last chapter, photosynthesis, plants. I'll write this down, but carbon dioxide plus water plus light will produce glucose and release oxygen. Of course, anything below the light level is going to need to get its oxygen because these cells are aerobic respirers. I mean, these cells are too, but they're making their own oxygen. And there's other things that the plants are going to need also. We'll talk about that in a minute. Photosynthesis. Remember I said on the big things, the aerobic respiration and photosynthesis are kind of mirror images of one another? Here's a big thing, is that reverse this and take this energy and make it energy into ATP, and basically you've got aerobic respiration. Now, the plants have to do stuff too. Any living cell is going to have energy. So they are making their own fuel supply through photosynthesis. But they're also built of a very stable starch. Remember, undigestible starch, and one of the reasons they make it undigestible is because they have no plans of ever breaking it down. They're building themselves out of it. They do make some digestible starches. Those are the ones they're planning on using later, so they have to be able to break it down themselves. And that makes it easier for us to break them down. Old stuff. But they're not making this stuff for us. They're making this stuff for themselves. Now, because they are alive, you cannot live on just glucose alone. They need to be able to build amino acids to be able to build their own proteins. Remember, protein-based chemistry. They have enzymes and other sorts of structural proteins, other sorts of proteins doing things. They need to build them. And as a starting point to make amino acids, they need nitrates. Nitrates is nitrogen with some oxygen stuck on it. Well, all around us, there's nitrogen gas. Nitrogen gas is two ends triple bonded to each other. That is very difficult to get apart and convert to nitrates. And very, very few plants have the chemistry in their own cells to do that. Plants typically use buddies, symbionts. Land plants, these are typically embedded in the roots. You know, there's air gets into the soil and surrounds the roots. The either bacteria or funguses take the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, fiddle with it a bit, make nitrates, give that to the plant. The plant goes, thank you very much. Here's some glucose. Here's a nice place to live. Symbiosis, right? Each side is getting something from the relationship. And there probably would not be land plants if this symbiosis had not worked out in the oceans before these guys moved up onto the land. Because once they were There are some nitrates available in ocean water, not a lot. So they kind of worked this out a long time ago. But would have been no nitrates available up on land without some buddies to be able to do this with the nitrogen in the atmosphere. So glucose is our base fuel, but our real fuel, the stuff we really run stuff on, just talked about that in the previous chapter, ATP. You need a source of the P. You need a source of the phosphates. There are some symbionts that can mobilize phosphorus into phosphates from the soil, but also when rocks erode with phosphorus in them, very often they oxidize and there's phosphates there. When we fertilize plants, these are the two primary things we put in the fertilizer. We put nitrates and we put phosphates. And one of the problems you wind up with is that, yeah, you get it onto your fields and it does the fields a lot of good, but then it rains and it runs it off into the local waterways, and the algae and other plants in the waterways go, wee, not a lot of this stuff is eroding off of the local rocks into the soil or into the water. So, this fertilizes the holy hell out of them. And actually nearshore ocean environments enriched with agricultural fertilizer. I was going to say artificial, but it doesn't have to be artificial. It can be manure too. But agricultural fertilizer, you get algae, what I call algae blooms, that can be dangerous. Some ocean algae can be very poisonous. Plants also need a number of minerals. Chlorophyll has, I always get this backwards, I'm pretty sure it has magnesium in it. It might have manganese in it. But that's a mineral that they need. No chlorophyll, no light capture, no plant. Turns out a very important part of photosynthesis is ferrying electrons around. And there is an iron containing compound, viridoxin, that does that. So they need iron. In fact, there are whole areas in the oceans where everything that the algae would need to be the bottom of the food chain is there, except no iron. Iron that comes out from the runoff from the continents doesn't get that far out into the oceans, and it creates these large dead zones because no plants, no food chain, no nothing. So iron can be what's called a limiting factor in a lot of ocean ecosystems. Somebody a bunch of years ago went, well, let's test this, right? And they went way out in the middle of the ocean where there was really not a heck of a lot going on. They dumped a whole mess of iron into the water, and within a couple of weeks, algae all over the place. So they said, okay, yeah, we're right. That's all it needed was the iron. And there's other minerals. There's some sodium and chloride and other sorts of things that they use the same way that we use ions to do some of our chemistry. They use ions to do some of their chemistry. The other part of the equation, light. Light is radiation, right? Energy traveling around the universe as waves is radiation. And there's all sorts of different sizes of waves. Now, the way that waves are categorized, they're all traveling in the same space, the same medium. They're all going the same speed, the speed of light. That can speed up or slow down whether it's going through a vacuum or going through gases or going through water or going through glass. But everything's still going more or less the same speed, although the mediums do affect certain waves differently from other waves. In a vacuum, everything goes the same speed. We're sitting here on the surface of the Earth. There's light coming in from the sun. There's a whole bunch of different frequencies of light coming in from the sun. Now, our ancestors took advantage of the frequencies that were in our neighborhood to build our vision systems. Is that The reason why it would make no sense for Kryptonians to have X-ray vision is there's not a heck of a lot of X-rays around. There's nothing really to see on the X-ray end of the energy spectrum. There's X-rays coming in from space. I don't know, maybe Krypton had a weird atmosphere and X-rays got down to the surface. But we see light that's around us. We don't necessarily see all the light that's around us, but we see a decent amount of it. How do we see it? Well, it bounces off of stuff. This red car, all these different frequencies are hitting the red car, but only the red is bouncing off. So it's coming into our light, our eyes. We have cells that absorb red, and when they absorb red, they go and they send a message to your brain going, "Yeah, we're seeing red." We have receptors that receive blue. We have receptors that receive green, and that's how we tell color. Now, a lot of animals in the world have never really had any need to see anything but light and dark. Our ancestors needed to know when the fruit was ripe, when the plants were saying, "Here, take these seeds away from the plant. Here's the bribe. The seeds are ready, here's the bribe." And so they generate colors. And so our ancestors had a need to differentiate colors. Things that pollinate flowers differentiate colors. But your typical cow or any grazer, they don't need to see, they're not eating flowers and fruits, they're just eating grass. They don't really need to know whether it's green or not. That's why tigers can be orange, is that if you can't see colors, a gray tiger against a gray plant background, pretty good, with the stripes and everything, pretty good camouflage. We see them pretty well, but we were never a primary prey for tigers. They'll kill us and eat us if they can, but we're not really their preferred food. So light energy. Energy, let me get this up here. Now I got it up too far. Let's leave that. Energy travels as waves. The waves are characterized by how far apart each peak is or each trough. You can measure it either way. But this distance that they got here is the wavelength. Now, two waves traveling the same speed, if the waves are short, then in a second, a whole bunch of them are going to hit a target. If the waves are long, in a second, not so many of them are going to hit a target. Think of it as like you're shooting bullets out of a repeating gun. Is that you can shoot a gun that fires 50 bullets a second. That's going to punch a pretty decent hole. You're shooting a gun that fires 2 bullets a second. That's going to punch a hole, but it's not going to punch anywhere near as big a hole. So short wavelengths close together equals more energy. 50 bullets per second is a frequency. 2 bullets per second is a frequency. Higher numbers there equal more energy. So the frequency is how many waves hit something in a given amount of time. Now what we have here are a lot of the different, what they call electromagnetic energies. This little bitty bar expanded here is the light that we can see, the visible light. So these are colors that we can make out. Now, down at the longer wavelengths, you have red. Longer, less energy. Up at the higher wavelengths, shorter, more energy, is the purple. Just beyond that is the ultra purple, ultraviolet. Ultraviolet, more energetic than visible light. Infrared on the other side of red, is what comes off of things that are warm. Warm things radiate infrared. Not as powerful an energy. When people first were growing plants indoors, as an agriculture, they went, well, if we got to put the lights up, let's put up lights that are really good for plants. Plants absorb almost everything but the green. Some frequencies they absorb better than others, but they absorb purples and blues and reds and oranges and some yellows. And they went, well, short wavelengths, more power. 100-watt purple bulb is going to give more energy to the plants than a 100-watt red bulb. Let's make the bulbs purple. So old plant lights were very purple. If you buy a plant light now, it's not so purple. They did discover that when you're growing plants indoors, they need to be tended by people not too crazy about living under purple lights. So they kind of skewed back to, okay, let's make everything visible to people that are doing the work. And so now plant lights are more white. They do skew a little bit toward the purple, but it's not that easy for us to see. Now, there are some animals that see ultraviolet. Bees see ultraviolet. A bee's light range starts in the ultraviolet and goes to about here. So it goes from about here to here. So they have a visible light range that's similar to ours, except it's moved over a little bit. And there are some animals that see infrared. Rattlesnakes can hunt at night. They're hunting mice and stuff that are warm-blooded. Warm things radiate infrared. They can see them as spots of infrared in a completely dark environment. To us, dark. To them, it's not dark. And of course, people use infrared cameras. They can see people in the dark because people are warm and they glow in the infrared. Getting away from this middle range, down here, you get microwaves and radio waves. Now the waves are getting big. I can't tell you why they call them microwaves, which would indicate that they're small, but they're not. I mean, up here, the wavelength is a meter. That's a pretty long wave. Up here, the wavelength is a kilometer, over half a mile. And that's what radio waves are. Down here beyond ultraviolet are X-rays and gamma rays. Now we're getting into things that really do pack a pretty decent punch. Leave yourself some room because I'm going to talk about these. Different frequencies interact with matter in different ways. Matter can absorb certain frequencies. There's a blue shirt. It's absorbing everything but the blue. They can reflect certain frequencies. This is reflecting blue. That's why it's showing up as blue on the screen. That's why it's showing up as blue in your eyes if you can see blue. Matter can scatter. Is that when light from the sun hits the atmosphere, a lot of the materials in our atmosphere, instead of letting the blue through directly, they bounce it around. Which is why if you look at the sky away from the sun, if you look at the sky near the sun, it looks pretty white because all the frequencies are still coming through. But when you look away from the sun, you're mostly seeing the blue that's been scattered, bounced around, and is eventually coming down to your eyes from different places. And then there's some matter will absorb a frequency. This is how they knew what was in the space dust. They'll absorb certain frequencies. Well, how do they absorb it? The electrons on the outer shell will absorb certain frequencies and they'll go and they'll bounce out. They'll take the energy and it speeds them up so they push themselves into the next level away from the atom. Now, before this, that level was empty. Now that level has one or two lonely electrons in it, and the one below it isn't full anymore. It's not a real stable situation. So they'll absorb, they'll bounce out, they'll zip around a little bit, and then they'll go, oh, crap, this is bad, and they'll go back down. Well, when they go back down, they have to lose energy to do that. They have to slow down, they give the energy up. And it comes back out of the atom, but some of it's been frittered away, right? It doesn't come back at the same energy level that it went in. It re-radiates. It comes out at a lower energy. And there are other interactions that do that also. A black parking lot in the summertime absorbs the light from the sun and re-radiates infrared, re-radiates heat. We're going to see photosynthesis involves a decent amount of re-radiation. Pigments, things that we call that because we see color bouncing off of them. The big pigment in photosynthesis is chlorophyll. Turns out there's a few different chlorophylls, but what most plants that you would see use are chlorophyll A. But photosynthesis, remembers, occurs in a bunch of other kingdoms like the Archaea and the Monera and the protists, and they don't all use exactly the same chlorophyll. And ocean algae, some of them have a special chlorophyll that will, or other types of pigments, that can pick up light that can get deep down into the water. Different levels of water, you get different colored algae for this reason. In plants also, they have secondary pigments that will also pick up colors that chlorophyll's not that good at. Those are called carotenoids. Gee, here's a guess. Where did they first get discovered? Carrots. What color was that carotenoid? Orange. Beta carotene reflects orange. So carotenoids do a bunch of things. They gather some frequencies and go here, and they feed it into photosynthesis. Here's some stuff you're not good at catching. Here's some extra energy. But they also, plants will use those colors as a way to say, okay, our pollen's ready, bees. Come and get it. We got the food ready as a bribe, or other things for a bribe. And so they will make their flowers stand out against a green background by putting carotenoids in them or pulling the chlorophyll out sometimes. And they do that with fruits too, right? Is that what makes a tomato red is a carotenoid that reflects red, and it tells a fruit is just a way of getting seeds away from the parent plant. Some fruits are edible, and there you need to signal that they're ready to go. Some fruits, we were out walking the dog the other day, and it came with all the little burr prickers on my pants when I was done. Those are technically fruit, because they're set up to take the seeds away from the parent plant. So we think of fruit as being only edible, but technically a fruit is just, here, get this out of here, sort of thing. Even the little whirly things that come off of trees, the maple trees, are technically a fruit, because they fly through the air and they carry the seeds away from the original maple tree. But this, in the fall, when the signal goes to the trees, usually it's a few days of frost. That's what happened this fall. That's why we had a really good fall. We had a week where it was really cold at night, and a whole bunch of trees got the signal, okay, time to shut down. And they shut down the water going to the leaves. Well, when that happens, the chlorophyll starts to break down, and it breaks down quicker than the carotenoids that have always been in the leaves with the chlorophyll. The colors you see have always been there, but there's been so much green chlorophyll, it's covered them up, except in some things like red maples, where the red carotenoid does show through the chlorophyll. But the colors that you see in the leaves are carotenoids that take a little bit longer to break down. And when everything's broken down, then you're seeing the cellulose, the starch that makes the leaves up. That's that light brown color that a dead leaf has. Okay, we will stop there.